Welcome to our best practices video. We'll be focusing on rounding in third grade. We'll be taking a look at what you might see and hear as you visit classrooms and observe rounding instruction. My name is Stephanie Bowen. Let's get started. Take a look at our number line here. We're engaging students to start to think about what numbers could go on our number line. We could ask about what number would be in the middle. We could also ask students to think of three numbers that could go on this number line. We're starting to engage them to think about place value and where numbers are located. We could also ask a student which number would not go on this number line. These would be warm-up activities or engage activities for students as they begin thinking about rounding. For this rounding unit, we will have two key learning goals. The first learning goal is using number lines and place value to round numbers from 0 to 1,000. We'll be rounding these numbers to the nearest 10 or 100 by finding the closest number with no ones or no tens and ones, often referred to as benchmark numbers. Also, students will be estimating with addition and subtraction in order to predict and check the reasonableness of an answer. What does student learning look like in the classroom? The first thing you would expect to see are number lines. As students are learning how to round and make sense of it, they would be using a number line. In this example, we have the number 327 rounding to the nearest 10. As students are first learning, the benchmark tens might be provided for them. As they gain confidence in rounding, the students would be generating those benchmarks, finding the midpoint, placing their number on the number line, and then using that to determine which 10 is closer for rounding the number. Using both horizontal and vertical number lines puts the focus on place value understanding rather than tricks or rhymes for rounding. Also, students will then apply their rounding to real-world context. This would be a connection to MTR 7. Students are solving problems, and before they actually solve, they're going to be using their rounding skills to estimate the answer. This allows them to determine if their answer is reasonable or makes sense. We want to get our students talking about the mathematics that they are learning. Students engaging in discussions to reflect on their mathematics is related to MTR 4. Here are some questions that you might hear in the classroom. What number is directly in the middle of two multiples on your number line? Encouraging students to make sense of the number in the middle is definitely important for rounding. How does knowing the middle number help you? Here's where we want to get students to start to think about why that's important and how that helps them. Finally, you might hear, how did you determine what multiple a number was closest to on a number line? All of these types of questions encourage students to start to make sense of the math, and they might also start to find patterns or develop their own rules for rounding. These questions can be found in the Explorers part of STEMscopes, the Principal Math Chat cards. As students are learning about rounding, here is a list of some of the vocabulary words that we would expect to hear both teachers and students using in the classroom. This list of vocabulary words comes from the parent letter in STEMscopes. Let's look at some examples of how students will demonstrate their understanding of rounding. Using an open number line is one way that students can show their understanding of rounding. They're finding the two benchmark tens or hundreds, locating the midpoint, and then identifying which 10 their number would round to. You might also see students participating in games where they're rolling dice or spinning a spinner to determine a number and then rounding that number. Here are show what you know examples from our STEMscopes, where students are applying their understanding of rounding, and also where they are showing that they can use their rounding in estimating, in this case, a real-world situation of deciding which items to purchase. All of these examples are found in STEMscopes. Here are some questions you could ask students to gauge their understanding of rounding as you're visiting classrooms. Our questions are focused on understanding place value and how it relates to rounding. For example, how do you determine the benchmarks when rounding to the nearest 10 or to the nearest 100? We would also could ask students about the midpoint when they're rounding, or ask them to round a number for you and look for them to be explaining with a number line. These questions would help students show MTR 4 as well as MTR 5. Here's an example of a rounding activity students could do at home. I like this one because it doesn't take any materials and you could even do it in the car. This is called Guess My Number. The parent would say, I'm thinking of a number that could round to 60. What could it be? The students would then make guesses based on their understanding of rounding. They know that it would have to be 55 or greater, or it would have to be 64 or lower. So the student would make good guesses, and then eventually the parent would say, you have my number. You could repeat this activity by using rounding to 100 or 3-digit numbers rounding to 10. Thank you for joining me as we talked about our rounding unit for 3rd grade students. I look forward to seeing you in our next best practices video.